All right, it is 3 p.m. We will call the regularly scheduled Hutchinson Utilities Commission meeting to order. Start with declarations of conflict of interest.
I do have one. On the check disbursement report, Redline Systems is listed. I
Okay.
own Redline Systems.
Okay.
So for that reason, I will not be voting.
Okay. Please note that Matt will abstain from voting on the approval of the consent agenda. Anyone else?
No.
All right. Any questions or concerns? Any items to pull out of the consent agenda today?
I'm good.
Good.
We'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Monty.
All right, motion by Anthony and second by Monty.
Just give it to Matt if you want.
It's been a while. He's the new guy again. All right, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, financial statements. Jeremy.
Not really a whole lot to talk about. Really through the first quarter of the month, or first quarter of the year, trending about what we did last year through 2019. Just a couple things of note. The electric side obviously has ticked up some this year over last year. It's been a little bit warmer, and so even with some of the stuff that has gone on, at least in March with the COVID, kind of 19 going on, we didn't really see a whole lot of load reduction in March because most of the stuff didn't happen until mid-March, or March 24th was when the stay-at-home stuff went into place. So March actually trended pretty well on the electric side. So we had pretty high usage with really low power supply costs for the month. Our power supply costs were down with market purchases. I think the market purchases averaged about $15 a megawatt for the month, and then also our transmission is down. We talked a little bit about that with the budget, that they readjusted our rates going into this year, and so we adjusted our budget down. So transmission came in significantly cheaper than last month. So because we had lower power cost or power supply costs in those two areas, we noted on there that we didn't have our first power cost adjustment this month since May of 2018. So it's been almost 2 years since we have not had one. Jared and I are anticipating probably April, May as well. We may not have one. It'll be real close because our new wholesale supply rates have gone into play for the spring. So April, May will be lower overall rates as well from MRES. So, and if the market purchases stay fairly low and our transmission costs stay relatively stable to what those new rates are, we'll be hovering right on that. So obviously that means it reduces the amount of revenue that we're generating because we're not adding that power cost adjustment on, but the offset is our power supply costs are down that level. So otherwise we're trending pretty well on that side for the most part. The gas side is, because it has been warmer, we've seen some significant reductions on the gas side for the month of March. And that's been trending down January, February, and March. So we've had the first 3 months of the year have been, generally speaking, more warm than last year. So you're seeing about a 9% reduction so far year to date, and we had almost 13% reduction for the month of March. So the numbers were down quite a bit from that regard, and so obviously our net profit was down a little bit, but still trending fairly well. And we've talked about that before, depending on what the weather is, those two kind of play disproportionately to each other, depending on what's happening seasonally. But overall, still looking good financials for the month. The piece that I'm kind of keeping an eye on, we talked a little bit about, was just kind of watching the impacts, of the pandemic and this kind of extended stay that's been going on with a lot of the retail and the commercial side of things. I am starting to see. I've been tracking the weekly loads here, and I'm starting to see for the month of April that our loads have been ticking down some in that 1% to 3% range, depending on that. So I would anticipate when April's financials come out next month, that we'll see a little bit of general proportionate reduction in load weatherization, keeping that levelized, just with some of what we've been seeing here. So I'll keep you updated on that, but don't be surprised if the load is a little bit down going into April because of that.
Is there specific classes you're seeing that reduction in?
I haven't seen a whole lot. March is hard to tell because we had the first couple of months, we had a load tick up for the first few weeks in that month, and then the last 2 weeks were a little bit down. Saw a little bit of a small general load reduction, but that was offset by an increase in residential load because more people are staying at home, and so we're seeing, there's e-learning going on, so people are running multiple laptops and iPads and things at home during the day. We're seeing a little bit of peak, a little bit of load shift to a little bit later in the morning is when we have a little bit more higher peak, and then a little bit later in the evening. But April, I'll have a better idea with a consistent trend of 1 or 2% load reduction week over week. I'll look at the classes here when we build for the, in May, the first couple days in May, and I'll let you guys know kind of really where that really classification low is, where we're really seeing that discrepancy if there's any. But generally speaking, overall for around the country, people are seeing anywhere from a 3 to a 7% load reduction. When I talk about a lot of the CEOs and the GMs around the country, seeing some tick up on the residential side in a lot of areas, but a lot of those areas are hit hard with the industrial side and manufacturing and the commercial side. And so even though the residential side and those classes are ticking up in load, it's not enough to offset the reduction in load coming from the business side there. So we're not quite seeing those numbers here yet, but what I've told people on those calls is I would anticipate if we're going to see some of that, it's going to be the April-May timeframe. We lag about a month to 6 weeks behind a lot of the East and West Coast on some of those things, and so that'll be something that we'll look for April and May here that we'll really have a better trend line of what's going on here. So
I had a conversation today with a business owner that read that in Europe there's an oversupply of electricity and they're trying to sell it from one nation to the other, or actually pay somebody to take the electricity. And I didn't have a chance to research it, to read more about it, so really I can't speak intelligently about it, but I thought that was really interesting.
yeah, they've done that with even with oil and gas. Those negative numbers came out where they were just getting rid of it because they didn't have places for storage. A lot of the people on the utilities on the West Coast, when we've been talking about sequestration and quarantining, critical employees like in the system control and dispatch centers, a lot of those people out there in those areas, in those production areas, are saying we're quarantining some of these people, but we're really not keeping them isolated because they think over the next 4 to 6 weeks they're not going to have to generate much because loads are significantly down and there's a lot of renewables going on. And so a lot of the short-term forecasts for a lot of those utilities that have production facilities are they're probably not even going to run their production facilities over the next 4 to 6 weeks. Again, it's a seasonal time of the year, so loads aren't peaking yet in the summer, and there's so much market energy on the market right now that it's significantly cheaper just to buy off the market as to generate, even with the gas prices down. So some of those guys and those big utilities out in California and along the East West Coast have said, we're going to isolate people, but we really don't see them doing a whole lot in these production facilities, at least in the short term. Now that obviously could change if the weather starts getting hot in those areas, and you just start seeing load tick up, and then they're going to have to make the determination. But so it's kind of curious, interesting.
Don, we're dancing around the conversation here. I'd like to have it sometime today. I don't know where it belongs, so that's completely up to you, but I want to
Go for it.
Well, just see what, are you experiencing anything right now with customers and their ability to pay, cutoffs, extensions on that? What's going on there?
We aren't seeing too much of it yet. That's why I say I think we're going to lag. We're lagging here again for the month. So we just took our April payments for March's usage. And so we started taking those, and a lot of people really haven't, a lot of businesses really weren't shut down in the full phase yet. People weren't furloughed, weren't laid off, they weren't in the unemployment process yet. So we haven't seen a tremendous amount of that yet.
Okay.
We are starting to see some that just carry normal unpaid balances, knowing that, hey, you're not shutting us off, we're just going to allow it to keep going. But I would say the majority of our people in that 85 to 90% are still paying their bills. I think the concern I think that we have to just keep in mind, which I kind of mentioned at the last meeting, is the May's meeting. When we talk about at the May's meeting, what are the balances looking like now at the end of April? Because now there's been people that have been out of work for 3, 4, 5 weeks.
Right.
And I think that for one approach. And then if it starts getting significantly warm, which the anticipation and the forecast show a hot summer, and this stuff continually goes on, and there's a soft implementation phase by Waltz with the state, I do think we're going to get more and more calls of people just saying, we're just not going to continually pay our bills until
Right.
retailers too. So
Yep.
I anticipate that increasing. I don't know how dramatic it's going to be relative to some of the other utilities around the country, but
Okay.
I do think we'll see some of that.
How about from a state level or from a national level? Are you guys seeing any kind of push to sign on to a pledge to say, hey, we won't cut off customers or extend it 90 days, any kind of, waive late fees, that kind of thing? Is there any kind of effort going on there?
Yeah, so we've already done, so at the federal level, because there's been two conversation points going on, one at the federal level, one at the state level, where they've wanted to mandate utilities from absolutely not disconnecting people
Yeah.
until this COVID-19 pandemic is over. We've been able to mitigate that because what has happened is voluntarily, the investor-owned utilities, the co-ops, the public utilities have said, we're already doing that, we understand the situation that's out there, so we're not gonna shut people off. So that's stymied the mandate coming down from either the federal or state level. So that's already in place. No one's shutting off people, no one's disconnecting them, no one's charging late fees. And in fact, the investor-owned utilities came out with a huge letter, kind of saying, hey, look at us, we're not shutting anyone off. Well, the reality is everyone was going that direction anyway. So we were ahead of that. We were about 2 weeks ahead of people saying, hey, we're not gonna shut our customers off. So we were on the forefront of that here in Hutchinson. The piece that's really being talked about now is, at the federal level, there's discussion going on about mandating utilities to not start being able to collect on payments for 180 days after either the governors at the state level or the federal level says the pandemic is over. So so the problem with that is, by the time that we eventually see that happening, you're gonna be out a year of not collecting potentially, or not being able to shut people off. And then they're also talking about extending the cold weather rule into next year. And so one of the concerns here at the state level with some people that do a lot of shut-offs, a lot of utilities do shut-offs here, to keep their uncollectibles down, is that there could be an 18-month lag in collections. And so that's a huge concern that's going out without really a ton of aid relief for the municipal sector right now. And so that was one of the concerns too, is with a lot of the relief packages that have come out in the first 4 stimulus bills, there's very limited amount for a public utility to collect money back. One avenue is FEMA, but you have to have things documented, and it doesn't really talk about uncollectibles. It's more about costs that you've incurred through supplies, equipment, things like that. And of course, some of the people that are lobbied at the federal level, so that can be 2 years before you get your money from FEMA. So we're tracking those costs. Those aren't gonna, I don't anticipate those amounting to more than $30,000 or $40,000 here relative to large utilities. The bigger concern is if we have an 18-month lag of being able to collect, obviously we're gonna have some of our people that are typically uncollectible, or the business sector starting to see some of those things work up. So that's a thing that we need to keep in mind, is how we may anticipate working with customers, what are we going to allow. At this point, they haven't included any of that stuff in the federal level, but there is conversations about that going on both in the House and Senate about mandates to not allowing that. And they're also looking at going into mortgages and other types of things, but their utilities is on the top of the list right now as far as discussion. So
I think it might be helpful if we could have Jared provide us a report monthly for a while to show if we're seeing growing trends, add to our reports to see if, we start to see a trend that becomes concerning. I think our level of attention to it should kind of follow whatever that looks like. So
yeah, I'll certainly send you guys something out. I've already been asked to submit a couple surveys, one to this national level APPA to help with the conversations on Capitol Hill, and then also with MMUA here locally. And so the general questions are you, what type of percentage of load reduction are you seeing? What type of revenue reductions are you seeing? So we're starting to track that. Again, we're in probably the first couple weeks. So I'll start sending you guys something that you can kind of start seeing how our receivable balances are potentially growing, what type of potential revenue reduction we may incur.
Right.
And then
We're seeing a lot of the same things, and there's a new movement afoot from the attorney generals, or several attorney generals, and ours signed on to it too, to basically forgive balances and that kind of thing, going out into August. So it's fine and dandy. It's a great, and a lot of what you're doing is really good. But when you start looking at stuff that starts to impact the bottom line of the balance sheets, it's something to be thought about and something to be kept track of. So, thank you for that. Sorry, Matt.
Did you see, did Glencoe, did they do some sort of forgiveness type of people's balances?
They
Is that
did.
gonna be
You
coming a
want me to
trend?
touch on that, or you want me to touch on my report?
So now,
Did I take something out of step here?
No, I did that first.
let's go for it. We'll get back on track.
So Glencoe
Sorry
did do
about
something,
that.
so I talked with their GM over there, and he had talked about it on our MMUA call a while back. I already had found out about it because I had a couple customers in town, and hey, you see Glencoe's doing this, or you guys gonna do something? Essentially what they did though is they went in front of their board, they were, so what they did for the month of March is they forgave the energy portion of the customers' bills on there, and that equated to about $400,000. So their typical monthly bills are or what they bill out is about $500,000. He said about $100,000, that's through their demand charges, meter charges, and the other $400,000 is energy charge. I think they tried keeping that really low key and quiet because he didn't want the appearance to be out there that just because we're doing it, other utilities are in a position to do that. And so one of the things that he mentioned is they got a significant amount of money back through some of their contracts and some of their wholesale supply contracts, that they used that money in addition to some money that they had sitting in what they called their catastrophic replacement fund, essentially to rebuild their distribution system if they have a tornado or some catastrophic event. They used those dollars in the short term to give a forgiveness of the energy portion of the thing. So we talked a little bit about the terminology and how you're doing things, because there's certain legal requirements and laws that municipal utilities can and can't do. And so the forgiveness is better than giving a refund or a rebate. But, so they have done something. Delano was looking at, they called me the other day, and we talked a little bit about where in doing this, so it's too early to tell kind of where we're gonna be at, but that's something that I said I'd mentioned to the board, that may be something we look at. But they're looking at doing for any large uncollected balances or prior balances that people have had through a certain date, they put that balance on a zero interest loan repayment. So they're looking at that. But there's people all over Florida, their association down there, there's 7 of Florida's largest utilities. They're offering what they call stimulus packages. So they're either using reserves or using money essentially in their SIP programs down there. They're rerouting that to help out. They're using money at their rate stabilization funds. People are doing that to help cover some portion of a utility bill. Some are doing a one-time, hey, we're gonna give everyone a 10% break. You know, we're gonna throw $3 million at this month's bill, and that will equate to a 10% reduction in everyone's bill for the month as a way to help out through COVID-19. There's a city in Michigan that's looking to set up a nonprofit and funnel money to a nonprofit and then have them decide how they wanna give money out to people who apply for it to help with assistance. People are extending budget plans. You know, we have budget plans here. That's one thing that has been talked about is how far do you extend a budget plan on someone? So I sent a list to MMUA because I had been tracking this and we hadn't really talked about it because it's now going from the pandemic response plan to more of the restoration. Okay, how do we phase back in and how do we help customers as we transition forward? So I said, we haven't really talked about that, and here's my list. So I sent them my list of about 20 things that utilities around the country are doing, because I'm sitting on a webinar every month. And so they're adding to that, but people are all over the board, and right now in Minnesota there's only been one. Glencoe's done something, but East Grand Forks is looking at something, Delano's looking at something, and there is general more conversation about that, of potentially doing something. But here I think locally in Minnesota, there isn't enough trend and track record of how big these issues are moving forward, that people have really said, hey, we want to roll something out now. So that's kind of where things are at locally here. Definitely people on the down south, Texas, California, Florida, some of the areas that have kind of been in this situation a little longer, they've started rolling out relief packages and stimulus packages, and they've framed them in all sorts of different ways. And it really comes down to, one, people's financial positions. Your bond, we talked about bond ratings, making sure that you're not putting yourself in bad spots to reduce bond ratings or credit worthiness. And some people have reserves, some people don't. the smaller utilities, they run on 60 days cash and that's it. So they've talked about with mandates and things like that, that you start mandating us that we can't collect for a year, 18 months, power's getting shut off in these areas of the country. We talked about in Arizona, the guy was basically, power's getting shut off, irrigation's getting shut off. We have to pay our wholesale suppliers, and so there's just a lot of people all over. But there's definitely things being talked about, so it's just something to keep in mind as we move forward based on where we're at. If there's a interest in doing that, a willingness to do that. But to this point, I've told the group, we're monitoring it, but in my mind, it's a little too early to do that because we don't know what the impact's going to be locally for our customer base at this point, and we're obviously where you guys want us to sit as far as the financial position. So, but it's something to keep in mind, and I'll keep you guys updated as we move along and how things are progressing. But
I'm not convinced we need to do anything, but I think we need to be forward thinking in the 2 or 3 or 5 things we need to be tracking that will tell us when this thing would hit our radar, if it ever would. That's where I'm at right now.
right, the other piece I noticed, like in Florida and some of those places, they showed an example. Hey, the average residential bill is $126, so now it's down to $116. I sometimes wonder. I know that that's helping, but is $10 a one-time $10 kind of refund? Is that truly helping? The customers? And then when I look at their rates, I think, which is an important piece too, a lot of those rates are 12, 13, 14 cents. That they're paying, and we're paying 8, 9. So I kind of look at some of that too as, we can look at rolling out some relief or whatever, but we're keeping our rates so low relative to a lot of the people that are giving money back, that can be looked at as already a significant savings that's happening here too. So when I hear these, $40 million relief package from Austin, Texas, or $25 million that we're going to roll out, I also have to look at, well, what are the rates you're charging now? What are their demand charges? And most of the time they're significantly higher than that. But it doesn't necessarily deplete the ability to do something and try to give back. Again, we are public utilities, so obviously I know you guys are conscious about the community and those types of things. So.
Could be different if there wasn't already some government stimulus out there to help people.
Anything else? Anything else to touch on the financial statements?
That's it. Unless there's questions.
Any questions from the commission?
I got none.
None.
Okay. Entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Matt, second by Bob. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, next would be the open forum. I do not see any visitors here today. So we'll move on to communication, and brings us right back to Jeremy. Unless you want Mark to go for like 5 seconds.
It doesn't take that long to say I don't have.
Do you have anything?
I don't have it.
Okay. A couple quick things here. I should have mentioned in the financial section, we did receive the RP3 designation, again, for reliability, and we also received a safety award for just safety practices in the workplace. And so, those were in the packet. We did send those. Those are going to be press releases that are going out into the paper. So that I think they're next week.
Next week they'll be in there.
Next week. So, and I know MRS has sent out with their 11 members of the 60 that got the RP3 designation. So those are just important things because there's only a small percentage of the overall public utilities that apply for or meet those criteria for those things. So those are always good things to have in place here and meet those standards. So I just wanted to mention those things, that those things will be going out.
Well, please, on behalf of the commission, thank the staff
Yeah.
for all their hard work on those.
I will do that.
Those are, I think, a direct result of the way that the utilities run, from you down to everybody else that are dedicated to the place, and it's a great reflection on all of us because of that. So please pass that along.
I definitely will. One thing that's going into legislature that's not COVID related is they got through both the energy committees on the House and Senate side SIP reform. So now they're calling it Energy Optimization and Conservation Act, or ECO 2020 Act. So they've gotten that passed through the both houses, it still has to go in front of the full, House and Senate, but that looks like that's a promising thing, and really what it means to us is probably very little, even though there's changes in there, there's some ability to use some of those dollars for energy, diversification and electrification things. It talks about still being able to meet your energy conservation percentages and your spending goals, which we do typically every year. So there isn't, at least for us, a major impact of change related to that, whereas some other utilities, it's a little bit more significant for the ones that can't meet the spending requirements or the energy conservation requirements because they're just not doing a lot of that. They've created some language in there that allows them to at least try to accomplish that over a 3-year time frame, and if they can't, it allows the state agencies to come in and work with them on how to try to achieve those things. So, so there's some benefits for us, and there's some benefits in there for investor-owned utilities and their ability to do some things. But that seems to be moving forward, and that's been worked on for 6 or 7 years, trying to get some update in that SIP reform and just updating the language to more reflect what's going on in the world today. So that's one thing at the local level going on. Locally, we're here operationally with our orange phase response plan that was originally in place for 4 weeks, which would end at the end of this week. I did extend it for another 4 weeks until May 29th of May. I anticipate probably at that point that that we'll be looking at phasing back into what is called the new norm or some version of that. And so we'll work through that over the next couple of weeks on what does that look like. I'm not sure that I anticipate still opening up to the public yet, but that's a conversation we'll have. We'll have a conversation about staffing, bringing them back from their remote sites. I don't see us aggregating anytime soon, still practicing, the hand washings and the disinfecting and the social distancing stuff. But I'm anticipating at the end of May that we probably look at trying to fade down from orange down to some less response plan, but what that is, I'm not quite sure. And obviously we'll look at the next few weeks of data and what the governor comes out with and what I'm hearing from the Department of Health and things of that nature. But just wanted to let you know how we're currently practicing is that will be in place for 4 more weeks, and that's been working well. We've been keeping up on all of our critical stuff. We've been able to alternate the weekly shifts, and that's been going good. We've been able to get in all of our new services. It takes a little bit longer, but we're still keeping up on that.
So you're still able to keep up with the construction?
Yeah. The nice thing about the construction, when I talked to the guys the other day, was the city isn't doing as much construction. So really the main focus right now is Highway 15. They've slowed on that, so that's helped us that they're not into all these other street projects at this point. So we've been fine with that. And if we get into a project where we have to have someone come in because we need 3 on a crew to do something, people have been coming in and we'll come in and we'll come in and they'll get the project done and then put it out. So everything's been working well. So that was obviously one of the factors of extending it 4 more weeks, is we're not getting in a situation behind on anything. We've got plenty of work to do in the production facilities with getting some pieces put back into Unit 6, and so they're doing some maintenance and upkeep on some of those things. And I don't anticipate us really generating in May anyway, just because it'll be fairly constant. It won't be super hot, and the market prices are so cheap right now that we're just going to buy it off the market. So that's kind of the game plan from that regard. Item 3, we did receive the bids back for the transformers. We received 7 bids back on the main transformer and 6 bids back on the zigzag transformer. That's the positive. The negative is most of them been on the big transformer, only 2 complied with the requirements of the 7. And on the zigzag transformer, we had 4 of the 6 comply. So kind of running into the same type of issues. People submitting their bids are not acknowledging the addendums in their bid proposal. One vendor sent in their bid bond but had the name of a city that's not even in Minnesota. So they either sent us the wrong bid bond or got things crossed in the mail. And one doubled their bid on the final bid tabulation form, so it was a $2 million transformer versus their itemized million, so basic arithmetic. So it's just lack of attention to detail and just following through, and this one wasn't even a real sophisticated bid proposal relative to units 6 and 7, so I've told Danny needs to think about, two options, either we go forward with the recommendation you guys, and one of the two responsive bidders on the big one, and the lowest bidder on the zigzag, or we throw them all out and start over, and tell them, hey, you need to be better at cleaning up and
I
adhering
think
to
that might just be
bids.
natural selection on their own half. I mean, if they can't do that part right, do we want them doing the work for us?
Well, no, that's the other piece, but, so I'll let you kind of know where that's at. If we decide just to move forward with what we have, because the zigzags, we've got some good bids there, and the other two that were responsive bidders weren't the two lowest, but they weren't the highest, they were kind of in the middle, but there is still some savings potentially if we rebid it. So we'll talk about that. That may be a special meeting potentially coming up unless we rebid them. And if we rebid them, we probably need you guys to approve the bids, the bid advertisement for bids anyway. So there may be something between now and end of May where we need you to get back together.
Mark, is there anything legally that we need to know or abide by due to the nature of the bids we received?
No, in fact, Jeremy and I had an opportunity to talk about it earlier today. Basically what he's indicated to the commission is really your choice right now, right? Is try to realize some savings by rebidding it if possible, or making your best guess with what you think is a complete bid and see if that's gonna suffice, and really that's a decision that Jeremy and Dan are gonna have to make together and go from there. You know, the biggest component, I guess, is, you know, what I asked Jeremy is if there's any huge time crunch. And he's indicating to me that there probably isn't, considering this is a 2021 project. It would be a delay of perhaps 3 or 4 weeks if you rebid it. So, like so many things, it comes down to money, and if there's money to be saved, you know, maybe rebidding is a way to go. You know, obviously, a danger that you have with that is all the bidders probably are gonna realize everyone's numbers the second go around. Sometimes that works for you, sometimes that works against you, but it's all part of the puzzle.
So we'll kind of see, the ranges on the original bids, on the big one, which is the big dollar value, was anywhere from 846,000 to $1,000,001. So in the $200,000 range. There was one that was super high, but that one, they just doubled the amount, so that was a $2 million, but I think if they would have added up their stuff right there, that one was probably about 900,000. Good news, we got them. Bad news is we had a 33% completion rate, so.
We might not have gotten them.
We got them.
So, and then the last one, since we touched on kind of what utilities are doing for assistance, was just the insurance claim, giving you an update on that. We have received about $240,000 from Excel on the claim. Kind of good news, bad news. That's some of the good news. We're still kind of disputing about $98,000, which is half of the large transformer piece that is between what really caused it was the arc or the fire. So there's about $98,000 worth that we still have to negotiate and work through. And then there's another piece that we're waiting for, which is the installation costs that should be added in the claim, and that was never talked about. And so when I brought that up, that hey, you know, at some point, if we refurbish these things, they have to be brought back out here. They have to have a crane to lift them back up on the pad. They have to be reset and tested and hooked back up. Where are those costs at? And so they all kind of said, well, yeah, we never thought of that. So we're waiting for CE Power to provide us an estimate on what the installation cost would be, and that's going to be a part of the conversation too. So I'm anticipating we received $240,000. There's probably another $150,000, that we're getting to work through. As far as where Excel is at, they're saying they're done paying. They think they've paid their fair share, and that the league needs to pick up and pay a portion because they haven't paid for anything that they feel is related to some of the fire damage. So we'll have to work through that piece. But so we've got some dollars left to work through there, but we'll get through it. But we're just waiting on that additional information or cost to kind of circle the wagons back around here and kind of work through the resolution of this piece. So that's kind of what I have. Any questions on any of that stuff?
No questions? All right. Guess that'll take us down to the policies. There's a section there for review with no changes. But we do have changes for the exempt and non-exempt compensation plan.
Yep, so in these couple, just updating some of the descriptions as far as roles. Again, customer HR manager, we don't have that role here anymore. We've cleaned up a lot of that language in the past. This is one that had some of that language left in that we didn't probably catch the last go around. So just cleaning up that and really making it more generic where it's human resources or general manager of human resources. So who's ever in those positions, that's part of the responsibility. And then really the biggest piece is just updating this compensation policy to reflect what the board approved as far as the new scoring range, the descriptions, and then the different increased ranges based on the scoring, which is based on where that person's current salary sits within their grade. So if they're at the low end of the scale and they fall into a performance of 3 to 4, they're eligible for a 2 to 6% range based on where they fit. So just mirroring the information that I gave you guys and that you guys approved as far as the new compensation plan, putting it into this policy so it all matches. So that was really the biggest things.
Any questions from the commission on that?
I'd make a motion to approve the policy changes to the compensation plan, exempt and non-exempt.
I'll second.
Motion by Anthony and second by Matt. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that then takes us, we don't have any unfinished business, so it takes us to new business. And the approval requisition 8394, utility service body for a 2020 welding vehicle.
So this is kind of the second piece of some of our utility trucks is, usually we buy the truck and chassis comes in one bidder, one vendor, and then we have to get the utility body designed and have that eventually put back in at some point. So this is for one of the natural gases trucks, one of the ones that we just purchased this year to get a body put back on. The stuff is becoming more expensive, materials, and even these contracts, these state contracts, I'm guessing some of it's supply and demand, and they're getting behind on things, and so we've been seeing that since last year, 2019, on those things. So we did underestimate some of the budget there. We had about 38 to 40,000 for the utility box, so it's coming in about 60. The cheapest one's about 61, and they go all the way up to 89,000. So John and I talked about that piece, and I said if we prolong it and wait now, it's going to be more expensive next year. Now, then we've got trucks sitting in the backyard with no bodies on them, and we're not going to be able to use them, and then prolong this from selling our old stuff and moving that stuff on. So I said I would bring it forward, have you guys approve that, and if we need to readjust some of our capital around to do that, we certainly can. That kind of peace in mind. I don't anticipate us doing a lot of capital projects this year from what we had budgeted. I've talked with some of our guys, with Dave and John, and there's just things that we're not going to be able to get to this year with the pandemic going on, and so we're not going to get anywhere near spending our capital dollars for all of our infrastructure stuff, and so we do have to look at dollars in that, even though it's more expensive than what we anticipated it being. Asking you guys to approve the state contract lowest bid body.
Any questions from the commission?
Make a motion to approve requisition 8394.
I'll second.
All right, motion by Monty and second by Anthony. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, last item on the agenda, we have approve the HTI TDK natural gas transportation and commodity purchase agreement. Should be in the commission as a separate item in your email. Jeremy?
So this was one that we didn't have the contract in place when the packet went out last week, so we wanted to send you this stuff because we didn't want to prolong it. Obviously, their contract is expiring. We want to have this thing set in place for May 1st. So this is the latest natural gas transportation commodity purchasing agreement. We approved the 3Ms one a few months ago. So this is one that we've talked with HTI about and set, again, kind of a similar consistent contract, breaking out the distribution costs from the transmission costs, making sure that you understand there's two different rate components of the commodities, transportation costs together. And then adding on the meter charge to reflect our cost of service study costs moving forward. Keeping it at 1 year, we talked about that. I know Commissioner Morrow mentioned last month to make sure that we're trying to keep these things at a 1 year time frame with just uncertainty and things like that. And so we've talked about making sure that we're doing that moving forward. So we reduced that down to just a 1 year contract, just similar to 3M's contract. And, they approved it and sent it back to us, I think, late Friday afternoon after the packet went out. So otherwise, Mark and I have looked through the contract. We've talked about different things. We pulled out some things, changed some wording in there to make sure we're more protected as far as not, some of these contracts not being able to be transferred if someone else goes into that facility while this contract is in place. And so we feel confident about the contract for the next year with the rates that cover our cost of service. And so just asking the board to approve the next year's commodity transportation agreement for each chapter.
Any questions? Bob? No question?
No. I'll make a motion to approve the HTI TDK natural gas transportation commodity purchase agreement.
All right, motion by Bob,
I'll second that.
second by Matt. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Anything else to come before the commission today, Jeremy?
That's all I have.
Anybody else? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Motion by Monty, second by Anthony to adjourn.